Hello everyone, let's continue with middle adulthood. Just as a review, what ages did we associate with it? I'll give you a moment. Hopefully you said 40 or 45 to 60 or even 65. Middle adulthood is a time of increased life satisfaction. The self, much more complex and integrated than earlier decades and life stages. Self-acceptance tends to increase. Autonomy, what you can do on your own, is also strong. The number of social roles typically peaks. For some, it's parent, increasingly caretaker of children, take care of grandchildren, helping with the neighbors, helping with volunteering, doing more maybe at work, mentoring people, volunteerism, all sorts of things. Environmental mastery, master of your own domain sort of thing. Status at work and community tends to rise. Often feel the closest to fulfilling their potential that they yet have been. Let's now consider the major developmental task of middle adulthood. If they've had children, launching the children into their own lives. Then adjusting to home life without the children, the so-called empty nest. And quite possibly dealing with the adult children that are now returning to home, known as boomerang children, like the boomerang weapon of the Australian Aborigine people. What are the most common reasons why the children are returning? Well, if the children are under age 40, the most likely reason would be that they broke up with their partner or spouse. Second reason, to save up to purchase a house. Third most common reason, they've lost a job. Fourth most common reason, to dig out of debt, especially educational debt. Now, if the adult returning home is over age 40, then it's most likely they are returning home to actually take care of the parents who might have especially if it's one parent that has a physical or maybe cognitive issue, such as a developing dementia or mental health issue. Another task, if you had children, you might become a grandparent. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I'm not sure which one, probably unfortunately, some parents that are grandparents have to go back into the role of parent. One of the most likely reasons is drug/alcohol issues of the child that make them unfit. They have to act as they age as caretakers for their aging parents or sometimes spouses due to ill health or early onset dementia, losing parents and the associated grief, and for preparing for late adulthood for themselves. Let's consider factors associated with a positive middle adulthood. Not all of them are unique to middle adulthood, though I will say, but still, how many of those can you list? Please go ahead and try to make a list up. I suspect you've been able to perhaps think of quite a few of these. I assume the COVID situation might have brought them to the forefront of your mind, such as good health, maybe job and economic stability, especially if you are now currently out of work due to our current situation. You might have been really leaning on your friends, partner, or family relationships to sustain you. Probably less likely to have guessed would be a mastery of multiple roles, maybe work, family, religious, volunteerism, what have you, and overall a sense of control in your life. Probably not a surprise, losing even one of these can drastically negatively impact the quality of life. Let's do a little Erickson review. So I placed the stages, the first part of them, the positive outcome on the left in black, on the bottom, the negative outcome in red. So without peeking, go ahead and see if you can match the good with the corresponding bad. I assume the first stage was the easiest, trust versus mistrust, then autonomy versus shame and doubt, initiative versus guilt, industry versus inferiority. Then we get to adolescence, identity versus role confusion. That was probably easy since we've done that recently, as well as, I assume, intimacy versus isolation. And the one that you probably were not familiar with is the one we're tackling now, generativity versus stagnation. So as you consider the stage of Erikson, consider the ages we associate with it. That is middle adulthood, 40 or 45 to 60 or 65. So one is hopefully making a mark on the world in a positive way, a job that you hopefully like and you do well at and you contribute to, creating things that might outlive you. I look at my house and my farm and think of the people that lived before me. The shed that apparently used to sit by the bottom of the road and used to be a fruit and vegetable stand, I moved to a different part of my property and it now houses llamas that we had to build onto it. I look at other parts of the farm, such as the barns and the building. This used to be a horse urine farm. In the days before we had artificial estrogens and other hormones, they would collect the urine from horses and remove the hormones, and that's how people were given hormones. They were extracted from animal urine. So creating things that might outlive you. When you buy a house, you might tend to look at it that way. Others include raising children. We already mentioned work, doing things that maybe benefit the environment, your community, maybe your passion is animals. Failure to give back, the person becomes self-absorbed and often unsatisfied with their lot in life. You've probably heard of the midlife crisis, but it's actually rare, and apparently most of the individuals that have it tend to be men. As I've noted, the true midlife crisis associated with major restructuring of life is very rare, but a life evaluation is common, leading to what's called turning points, which might lead to adjustments for goals, activities, personal growth. I think the bottom picture captures the true midlife crisis that most of us think of. The gentleman who dumps his partner and gets a sports car, and that is the image, I think, for midlife crisis. Part of self-concept would be the consideration of possible selves, what one hopes to become and strives for, or perhaps one greatly fears and tries to avoid. Maybe trouble with substance abuse that is present in one's family, or perhaps mental illness. For some people, the desire is to be just as much like their parents as they possibly can be. For others, to be as different as one possibly can be. I think for most people, though, we try to emulate our parents' strengths and try to avoid some of their challenges or weaknesses. Possible selves can be a strong midlife motivator. At midlife, a change of plan, a change of action is still possible, but there's a growing sense that as time passes, the possible selves that have not been achieved cannot be achieved. Let's consider gender identity and personality. During middle life, there's a rise in androgyny. Women tend to take on so-called masculine traits, such as assertiveness. Men tend to take on so-called feminine traits, such as nurturance. It's interesting that of all the personality traits studied, including the big five, the least stable are masculinity and femininity. Some research suggests that we have all had 2 lives to live, 2 lifespans. The average man would be as masculine as, say it differently, the average man would be as feminine as the average woman, and the average woman would be as masculine as the average man. But I think very few of us are going to get 2 lifetimes, so we only get partway there. But still, there is a move towards the middle. As noted before, sibling relationships tend to be the longest life relationship. They vary dramatically from person to person, from sibling to sibling. Sometimes siblings are very close, others families not so much. Sometimes, unfortunately, there can be a falling out. Sometimes that falling out extends to the death and loss of one of the siblings. But again, high variability, so maybe reflect on your siblings if you have one, and your relationship with them. Let's consider job satisfaction. Overall, women are considerably less satisfied than men. Could you please think of as many reasons as possible why this might be so? Her reasons would include that their job is more interrupted or impacted by child rearing. Pregnancy obviously impacts her more. Often she's the one that will step out if there is a parent to step out during early childhood or infancy. She shoulders much more of the burden in terms of childcare. Another prominent reason is the glass ceiling, the pay gap, and sexual harassment. We'll consider the glass ceiling coming up, but today, 2020, what do women make on average for every dollar a man makes? You'll find out in the next slide. It's not good news if you're a woman, I think, or if you're a man. The pay gap is currently 80 cents for a dollar. This difference can rapidly add up, especially if you're a single woman or if you're any woman who's saving for retirement. Before we go on, take a look at the first sentence on the slide and see if you can identify what two words should go in the blanks. If you thought it was glass ceiling, you are correct. I thought it'd be interesting to look at the CEOs of the Fortune 500 top companies according to marginalized population. Women, 11% of the population of CEOs, but 51% of the general population, so severely underrepresented. Specifically, black people, 9% of the population, but only 1.8% of CEOs. Black women, though, a total of 2, so not 2%, but a total of 2. Latinos, 4% of Fortune 500 CEOs, but are 20% of the population. On the right are pictured the one Latino current CEO. Above it, I didn't mention the 2 current black CEOs. The one on the left is actually the CEO of Tia Krepp, the major corporation for teachers' retirement. And I was very pleased to learn that she is the CEO that's managing the portfolios that are associated with my retirement. I retired May of 2025. Latino women, as mentioned, 4% of CEOs, but 20% of the population. One Latino woman CEO, a total of 1. Asian women, a total of 2, not 2%, but 2. You might wonder why no overall Asian percentage of CEOs. Asian men are doing fine and are at par of the percentage of population. So equality has not been achieved by a long shot. And this is just another measure of it. Let's consider divorce in middle adulthood. The rate of divorce is much higher than in earlier generations. Why? Please list as many reasons as you can. Again, not reasons for divorce, but for reasons why divorce is increasing. Over the last 20 years, as you can see on the bottom, rates for the 50-plus crowd, in specific, have doubled. How many of these reasons did you think of? Longer life expectancy. In 1900, the average life expectancy was 50. Nowadays, decades more. Sometimes one can't face the idea of spending decades more with a particular person. Greater acceptance of divorce. In the past in this country, divorce was scandalous. Now, commonplace. Less tolerance of abuse. In the past, it was acceptable to a man to discipline his wife as he might discipline his children. Nowadays, that is, for most segments of the population, fully unacceptable. Today, with less tolerance of abuse, there's also more resources for abused women. I did choose women specifically for this bullet point because severe abuse of men is still very rare, at least in terms of a man-woman relationship. Also, people are no longer staying together for their kids. That's Bailey. Women are more educated, which means they have more money. And sometimes people have had enough of the chemical dependency issues of a spouse, and with the current rise in opiate and other drug epidemic, that is a more significant factor. Parents in this age enter the launching stage. Children are going off to college, going off and getting apartment mates with same-sex friends, joining relationships with significant others. For parents, there is decreased parental authority. What they say carries less weight. There's also significantly decreased contact between the parent and child, and often significantly less financial support. But at the same time, where the parent's responsibility for their children is typically decreasing markedly, responsibility for one's aging parents, particularly for women, is now starting to increase, sometimes very significantly. Let's consider grandparenthood. On average, begins in early 50s, can be a third of one's entire life. Many people look forward to being a grandparent, and there's often regret if no opportunity arises. For some parents who were not the greatest parents with their own children, there's a second chance, a chance for perhaps a little bit of a redemption. It fundamentally changes the relationship they had with their child. Instead of being a parent-child, in some ways the child is becoming more peer-like, and the child is getting a much greater perspective of what the parent went through and a parental viewpoint. For most people in grandparenthood, they have none of the work and all of the fun. But maybe sadly, some grandparents have to step in and take a role as the primary parent, especially with children that have substance abuse. Unfortunately, some people in the 50s are part of the sandwich generation. No, this is not a food reference. Sandwich, by the way, came from the Earl of Sandwich, who invented the sandwich, apparently on the go. But anyway, the sandwich generation is being sandwiched like the meat or the peanut butter between the slices of bread, sandwiched between the needs to care for one's children and at the same time caring for the needs of one's aging parents. Who is most likely to care for parents? Women, even when it's not their parent. Also, the child that lives the closest, children with more financial means, and it varies considerably by ethnicity. Caucasian individuals, non-Hispanic that is, are less likely to become sandwich generation people. As we just noted, women tend to play the biggest role in taking care of parents, even when the parents are in-laws and not one's own parents. This places particular significant demands on the woman. First of all, significant time demands. These time demands can have vast negative effects, including job absenteeism, physical and mental exhaustion, and depression, amongst other issues. So let's take a look at social media use by age. Let's focus on 2015 since that's the most recent in this chart. If you had to generalize how much individuals of middle adulthood versus late adulthood are engaged in social media use, what would you say? That was probably an easy question once you looked at this particular figure. For people in middle adulthood, roughly half are engaged in social media use. And for people that are in late adulthood, just over a third are engaged in social media use. Let's consider middle adulthood in terms of retirement, starting with the two A's, anxiety and anticipation. If you go to any financial aid planner, he or she will probably show you this particular stool. I know my person did. It's a three-legged stool, as stools tend to be, Social Security being one limb of it, pension the other, and personal savings. All three must be present for a successful retirement typically. Let's consider basic retirement facts. Retirement planning really should begin in young adulthood. but must start by middle adulthood. If you could say there's no way that your salary can afford it, well, even $10 a paycheck started at young adulthood can have a huge effect, much bigger than $100 a paycheck in, say, late middle adulthood. Of those surviving to age 85, women have an average of almost 7 years to live, and men have an average almost of 6 years to live, so plan accordingly. And if you have longevity genes in your family, plan for a lot longer than that. Let's now consider the bad news and the not so bad news, or perhaps good news, depending on if you're a glass half full or glass half empty sort of person. Bad news, 20% of people expect to never be able to afford to retire. So they plan to work as long as they can stand, or maybe even as long as they can sit. The average monthly SSI benefit is $1,781, so not a lot. Unless you're used to living very, very lean, you'll want to have money from the other two legs of the retirement stool. The perhaps good news, 6 out of 10 workers feel confident, which means 4 out of 10 do not. More than 1/3 of households have IRAs to help them, personal retirements, but that means 2/3 do not. More than half adults, or roughly half adults in middle adulthood, say that saving for retirement is their top financial priority. Now that is straight out good news.
So could you think what IRA stood for? Individual Retirement Account. But let's consider this slide, life in middle adulthood. This is a time in which we have the most close relationships. Unfortunately, as we progress to late adulthood, we'll start losing many of those people, but right now we have the most. Ties to both the younger and older generations, well-established friendships, and an opportunity to strengthen ties. For many, it is a very liberating time, but as we noted, the roles are starting to shift. One may start to parent one's parents.